One of my vivid academic memories dates back around 30 years ago when I wrote an essay on the novel, The Exorcist, for my Religion 101 class, which focused on the occult and witchcraft. The course was taught by Professor Nikki, who intriguingly had a penchant for gambling at the Palace Casino. While he possessed knowledge about the supernatural, he seemed to have a streak of bad luck at the casino, and I found myself winning a few bets when I bet against him. Writing that essay required extensive research, although the specific details have faded from my memory over time. I explored the idea that many adolescents might experience symptoms similar to those portrayed by Regan in the novel, but most of these symptoms tend to dissipate as they transition into adulthood. Consequently, the majority of individuals facing such challenges seek assistance from social workers and psychiatrists rather than turning to the church. However, it is worth noting that exorcisms still exist in contemporary society. They are carried out privately and anonymously by the church, following meticulous investigation and evaluation by professionals. While the church keeps these cases confidential, they do occur, albeit in a more discreet manner. It is fascinating to observe the intersection of the supernatural and the academic realm, and my experience researching and writing about The Exorcist provided valuable insights into the subject matter. Chapter 3. Early on the morning of April 11th, Chris made a telephone call to her doctor in Los Angeles to ask him for a referral to a local psychiatrist for Regan. "Oh, what's wrong?" Chris explained. Beginning on the day after Regan's birthday, and following Howard's failure to call, she had noticed a sudden and dramatic change in her daughter's behavior and disposition. Insomnia. Quarrelsome. Fits of temper. Kicked things. Threw things. Screamed. Wouldn't eat. In addition, her energy seemed abnormal. She was constantly moving, touching, turning, tapping, running and jumping about. Doing poorly with schoolwork. Fantasy playmate. Eccentric attention-getting tactics. Such as what? The physician inquired. Chris started with the rappings. Since the night she'd checked the attic, she'd heard them again on 2 occasions, and in both of these instances, she'd noticed, Regan was present in the room and the rappings would cease at the moment Chris entered. Secondly, she told him, Regan would lose things in the room: a dress, her toothbrush, books, her shoes. She complained about somebody moving her furniture. Finally, on the morning following the dinner at the White House, Chris saw Carl in Regan's bedroom pulling a bureau back into place from a spot that was halfway across the room. When Chris had inquired what he was doing, he repeated his former, "Someone is funny," and refused to elaborate any further. But shortly thereafter, Chris had found Regan in the kitchen complaining that someone had moved all her furniture during the night when she was sleeping, and this was the incident, Chris explained, that had finally crystallized her suspicions. It was clearly her daughter who was doing it all. "You mean somnambulism? She's doing it in her sleep?" "No, Mark, she's doing it when she's awake. To get attention." Chris mentioned the matter of the shaking bed, which had happened twice more, each time followed by Regan's insistence that she sleep with her mother. "Well, that could be physical," the internist ventured. "No, Mark, I didn't say that the bed was shaking. What I said was that Regan said it was shaking." "Do you know that it wasn't?" "No, not really." "Well, it might be clonic spasms," he murmured. "What was that?" "Clonic spasm." "Any temperature?" "No." "Listen, what do you think?" Chris asked him. "Should I take her to a shrink or what?" "Chris, you mentioned her schoolwork. How is she doing with her math?" "Why? How's she doing?" he persisted. "Just rotten." "I mean, suddenly rotten." "I see. Why'd you ask?" Chris repeated. "Well, it's part of the syndrome." "Syndrome? Syndrome of what?" "Nothing serious. I'd rather not guess about it over the phone." "Got a pencil?" He wanted to give her the name of a Washington internist. "Mark, can't you come out here and check her yourself?" She was remembering Jamie and his lingering infection. Chris's doctor at that time had prescribed a new, broad-spectrum antibiotic. Refilling a prescription at a local drugstore, the pharmacist was wary. "I don't want to alarm you, Ma'am, but this, well, it's quite new on the market, and they've found that in Georgia it's been causing aplastic anemia in young boys." Jamie. Gone. Dead. Ever since, Chris had never trusted doctors. Only Mark, and even that had taken years. "Mark, can't you?" "No, I can't, but don't worry. This guy I'm recommending is brilliant. He's the best. Now get a pencil." Hesitation. "Then, I've got one." What's the name? She wrote it down and then the telephone number. Call and have him look her over and then tell him to call me, the internist advised. And forget the psychiatrist for now. Are you sure? He delivered a blistering statement regarding the readiness of the general public to recognize psychosomatic illness, while failing to recognize the reverse, that illness of the body was often the cause of seeming illness of the mind. Now what would you say, he proposed as an instance, if you were my internist, God forbid, and I told you I had headaches, recurring nightmares, nausea, insomnia and blurring of the vision, and also that I generally felt unglued and was worried to death about my job? Would you say I was neurotic? I'm a bad one to ask, Mark. I know you're neurotic. Those symptoms I gave you are the same as for brain tumor, Chris. Check the body. That's first. Then we'll see. Chris telephoned the internist and made an appointment for that afternoon. Her time was her own now. The filming was over, at least for her. Burke Dennings continued, loosely supervising the work of the second unit, a special crew filming scenes that were of lesser importance, mostly helicopter shots of various exteriors around the city, as well as stunt work and scenes without any of the principal actors. But Dennings wanted every foot of it to be perfect. The doctor was in Arlington. Samuel Klein. While Regan sat crossly in an examining room, Klein seated her mother in his office and took a brief case history. She told him the trouble. He listened, nodded, made copious notes. When she mentioned the shaking of the bed, he appeared to frown dubiously, but Chris continued. Mark seemed to think it was kind of significant that Regan's doing poorly with her math. Now why was that? You mean schoolwork? Yeah, schoolwork, but math in particular. What's it mean? Well, let's wait until I've looked at her, Mrs. McNeil. He then excused himself and gave Regan a complete examination that included taking samples of her urine and her blood. The urine was for testing of her liver and kidney functions, the blood for a number of checks: diabetes, thyroid function, red cell blood count looking for possible anemia, and white cell blood count for exotic diseases of the blood. When he'd finished, Klein sat and talked to Regan, observing her demeanor, and then returned to his office and started to write a prescription. She appears to have a hyperkinetic behavior disorder, he said to Chris as he wrote. A what? A disorder of the nerves. At least we think it is. We don't know yet exactly how it works, but it's often seen in early adolescence. She shows all the symptoms: the hyperactivity, the temper, her performance in math. Yeah, the math. Why the math? It affects concentration. He ripped the prescription from the small blue pad and handed it over to Chris. He said, "This is for Ritalin." What? Methylphenidate. Oh, yeah, that. 10 milligrams, twice a day. I'd recommend one at 8 a.m., and the other at 2 in the afternoon. Chris was eyeing the prescription. What is it? A tranquilizer? A stimulant. A stimulant? She's higher than a kite right now. Her condition isn't quite what it seems, explained Klein. It's a form of overcompensation, an overreaction to depression. Depression? Klein nodded. Depression, Chris repeated, looking aside and at the floor in thought. Well, you mentioned her father. Chris looked up. Do you think I should take her to see a psychiatrist, Doc? Oh, no. I'd wait and see what happens with the Ritalin. I really think that's the answer. Let's wait 2 or 3 weeks. So you think it's all nerves? I suspect so. And those lies she's been telling? This'll stop it. His answer puzzled her. He asked her if she'd ever known Regan to swear or use obscenities. Funny question. No, never. Well, you see, that's quite similar to things like her lying. Uncharacteristic, from what you tell me, but in certain disorders of the nerves it can. Wait a minute, hold it, Chris interrupted. Where'd you ever get the notion that she uses obscenities? I mean, is that what you were saying or did I misunderstand? Klein eyed her curiously for a moment before cautiously venturing, yes, I'd say that she uses obscenities. Weren't you aware of it? I'm still not aware of it. What are you talking about? Well, she let loose quite a string while I was examining her, Mrs. McNeil. Are you kidding me, Doc? Such as what? Klein looked evasive. Well, let's just say that her vocabulary's rather extensive. Well, like what? I mean, give me an example. Klein shrugged. You mean shit or fuck? Klein relaxed. Yes, she used those words, he said. And what else did she say? I mean, specifically. Well, specifically, Mrs. McNeil, she advised me to keep my goddamn fingers away from her cunt. Chris gasped with shock. She used those words? Well, it isn't unusual, Mrs. McNeil, and I really wouldn't worry about it at all. As I said, it's just a part of the syndrome. Looking down at her shoes, Chris was shaking her head. It's just so hard to believe, she said softly. Look, I doubt that she even understood what she was saying. Yeah, I guess, Chris murmured. That could be. Try the Ritalin, Klein advised her, and we'll see what develops. And I'd like to take a look at her again in 2 weeks. He consulted a calendar pad on his desk. Let's see, let's make it Wednesday the 27th. Would that be convenient? Yeah, okay. Subdued and morose, Chris got up from her chair, took the prescription and crumpled it into a pocket of her coat. Yeah, sure. The 27th would be fine. I'm quite a big fan of yours, Klein told her as he opened the door leading into the hall. An index fingertip pressed to her lip, head lowered, Chris paused in the doorway, preoccupied. She glanced up at the doctor. You don't think a psychiatrist, Doc? I don't know. But the best explanation is always the simplest one. Let's wait. Let's wait and see. Klein smiled encouragingly. He said, try not to worry. How? As Chris was driving her home, Regan asked what the doctor had told her. He just said you're nervous. That's all. That's all. Chris had decided not to talk about her language. Burke. She must have picked it up from Burke. But later Chris spoke to Sharon about it, asking if she'd ever heard Regan use that kind of obscenity. Oh, my God, no, said Sharon, slightly taken aback. No, never. I mean, not even lately. But you know, I think her art teacher made some remark about it. You mean recently, Sharon? Last week. But that woman's so prissy. I just figured maybe Regan said, damn, or, crap. You know, something like that. Oh, by the way, have you been talking to Rags about religion, Sharon flushed. Well, a little. That's all. I mean, it's hard to avoid. Chris, she asks so many questions, and, well, she gave a helpless little shrug. It's just hard. I mean, how do I answer without telling what I think is a great big lie? Give her multiple choice. In the days that preceded her scheduled dinner party, Chris was extremely diligent in seeing that Regan took her dosage of Ritalin. By the night of the party, however, she had failed to observe any noticeable improvement. There were subtle signs, in fact, of a gradual deterioration, increased forgetfulness, untidiness, and one complaint of nausea. As for attention-getting tactics, although the familiar ones failed to recur, there appeared to be a new one. Reports of a foul, unpleasant smell in Regan's bedroom. At Regan's insistence, Chris took a whiff one day and smelled nothing. You don't smell it? Regan asked, looking puzzled. You mean, you smell it right now? Oh, well, sure. What's it smell like, baby? Regan had wrinkled her nose. Well, like something burny. Oh, yeah? Chris had sniffed yet again, this time more deeply. Don't you smell it? Oh, yeah, now I do. Why don't we open up the window for a while, get some air in? In fact, Chris had smelled nothing, but had made up her mind that she would temporize, at least until the appointment with the doctor. She was also preoccupied with a number of other concerns. One was arrangements for the dinner party. Another had to do with the script. Although she was still enthusiastic about the prospect of directing, a natural caution had prevented her from making a prompt decision. In the meantime, her agent was calling her daily. She told him that she'd given the script to Dennings for his opinion, and said she hoped he was reading and not consuming it. The third, and the most important, of Chris's concerns was the failure of two financial ventures: a purchase of convertible debentures through the use of prepaid interest, and an investment in an oil drilling project in southern Libya. Both had been entered upon for the sheltering of income that would have been subject to enormous taxation. But something even worse had developed. The wells had come up dry and rocketing interest rates had prompted a sell-off in bonds. These were the problems that her gloomy business manager flew into town to discuss. He arrived on Thursday. Chris had him charting and explaining through Friday, when at last she decided on a course of action that the manager thought wise, though he frowned when she then brought up the subject of buying a Rari. You mean, a new one? Why not? You know, I drove one in a picture once. If we write to the factory, maybe, and remind them, it could be they might give us a deal. Don't you think? The manager didn't, and cautioned that he thought such a purchase improvident. Ben, I made over $800,000 last year and you're telling me I can't buy a freaking car. Don't you think that's ridiculous? Where'd the money all go? He reminded her that most of her money was in shelters. Then he listed the various drains on her income: federal income tax, her state tax, estimated tax on future income, property taxes, commissions to her agent and to him and to her publicist that added up to 20% of her income, another 1.25% to the motion picture welfare fund, an outlay for wardrobe in tune with the fashion, salaries to Willie and Carl and Sharon and the caretaker of the Los Angeles home, various travel costs, and, finally, her monthly expenses. Will you do another picture this year? He asked her. Chris shrugged. I dunno. Do I have to? Yes, I think perhaps you should. Elbows propped on her knees, Chris held her wistful face cupped in both hands as, eyeing the business manager moodily, she asked him, what about a Honda? He made no reply.